6 weeks ago, I was standing at King's Cross Station and my wallet was stolen from my bag. At the moment it happened, I was answering a text from my daughter. I was checking at the same time to see yet one more train had been cancelled. I was worrying about if I'd left my umbrella in the taxi. A young woman asked the way. I turned to help her. You can guess the rest. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't focused on the right things. I was trying to do too much. I wasn't doing what I was brought up to do, which is sit there and pay attention. I was instead doing what so many of us do in our busy lives, is thinking that somehow I could do it all at once. Have the conversation with my daughter, check on the train line, answer somebody's plea for help, in a kind and generous way, I have to say, before her boyfriend took my bag. I did all that because I was thinking about something else. I was probably thinking about what I was going to have for tea when I finally got home to York. My mind was not focused on what I was doing. And it occurs to me when I think about our hugely busy lives at the moment, that when you think about social change, most of the time we are missing the point because we're thinking about something else. 3 big things have rocked our world and shaken me to the core in the last 3 years. They've each got a name: Grenfell, Windrush, Tilbury. Each of those events happened because we weren't paying attention. The Grenfell fire that happened, that shocked the country, that killed so many people so tragically, so needlessly, so criminally, happened at a time when the big public discussion about housing was not about safety. It wasn't about people living in a block of flats managed by 13 different landlords. It was about how can we build more housing and shall we protect the green belt. That was the discussion about housing, and 100 families died. Grenfell will stay as a scar on our conscience because we weren't paying attention. But other people knew it was going to happen. If you'd looked the day of the fire at the website put up by those residents, they knew they were in danger. If you talked to the local priests in the area, they knew it was dangerous because they heard it from their parishioners. If you talked to the advice centres there, they knew danger was afoot. Windrush, scores and scores of grandparents, aunts and uncles deported back to the Caribbean. People who'd made their lives here, whose lives were distorted and destroyed by an act of government, sent back to a place they hadn't lived in for 40, 50 years. People who were the bedrock of our society. We weren't paying attention. We were having a big debate about whether we should be counting student numbers as they came from India and Pakistan. We were having a big national debate about immigration now. We didn't notice what was happening to people who'd lived in our midst all that time. Some people knew, their families knew, the communities knew, the churches they went to knew, but we weren't paying attention, so we didn't notice what was going on. And that lost a Home Secretary her job, as well as destroying so many people's lives. So Grenfell, Windrush, and Tilbury, the one you probably thought, what's she going to say now? 29 young Vietnamese found dead in a freezer container because they were being trafficked over here to do our nails in nail bars and dig our potatoes in Lincolnshire. We didn't really know what was going on. We knew that people were coming here illegally, but we were looking to the Mediterranean. We weren't looking there. 29 nearly children killed freezing to death in a freezer. Those 3 things shocked us. We didn't expect them to happen. We weren't paying attention. We were looking somewhere else. We're always looking somewhere else. And something dreadful happened that was a scar on our country. Bigger things than that have happened. 2016 referendum. We in the north of England woke up and saw what the result was. In London, the CBI, the TUC, the major newspapers, Whitehall, Westminster, the leading politicians were surprised. They weren't paying attention. They hadn't been listening to what people had been saying. I think up here, many of us had a bit more of a sense that things were not going to go quite as smoothly as those people had so casually and cavalierly assumed. We hadn't been paying attention to the anger, the dismay and the sheer sense of disconnection that so many people felt. Now this matters. It matters because it's in these things that happen that our society gets changed forever. Nobody will ever again be able to hear the words Grenfell and not think of a shocking fire. Nobody will ever again talk about Windrush as that amazing moment in the 50s when people came over here to form new lives and to build our society after the Second World War. What they'll remember now is the grandparents deported at the end of their lives back to a country in which they've never lived. Those are the stories of our nation's history, which when we miss them because our eyes are somewhere else, just like me, looking at the railway timetable and being cross because the trains are cancelled, bad things happen. Now, I don't know, looking around this room, if on Friday morning you woke up elated or destroyed by the results of the election on Thursday night. I'm not going to make any judgment about that. But I do know one thing. I do know that whatever the result had been of that general election, we are facing a decade, the second decade of this century, when some very big things are going to happen. We are going to have a constitutional crisis. A major discussion with some very difficult decisions and very uncomfortable truths about whether we stay as a United Kingdom, whether there is a United Ireland in my lifetime, which I would now put money on. Big changes about the shape of our society. We're going to have that constitutional debate in the next 10 years. We are going to face more climate disaster in the next 10 years. The floods in South Yorkshire are now, I believe, described as the new normal. That's the way our life is going to be in the next 10 years. Weird, funny weather events. Things will happen in ways we didn't predict. The things we were told would happen once in 100 years will now happen once in 15 years. The climate change is here and the climate emergency is with us. So constitutional change, climate change, and massive economic volatility. You may think that leaving the European Union is the best thing that could happen to us, and many of you may well believe it, or you may think it's a disaster. It doesn't really matter what you think, because we are going in for a period of economic volatility, when stock prices will go up and down, house prices will jump about, big household names, industries will relocate, and some may come here and some may go, but there will be a lot of change. And when you have change on that scale, on all three fronts, on the Constitution, on the climate, on our economy, it's extraordinarily easy to be as distracted as I was at King's Cross Station a few weeks ago. It's extraordinarily easy to be told that the real story is one thing when something else quite different is happening. So I want to go back to reflect on who knew. Who knew about these terrible things, about Grenfell, about Tilbury, about Windrush? Who knows now about the county lines which are transporting our children along railway lines to sell drugs and have their lives ruined forever? Who knows now about child sexual exploitation going on in some of our towns and villages? The people who know are the people we need to pay close attention to. And they are the people who I would call those of us who make up civil society. The connectors, the people who know their neighbours, the people who are in groups and associations, the people who go to a church or a mosque or a synagogue, the people who make deep connections. If we listen to them, if we listen really acutely to what people say is going on, perhaps we won't be so surprised by the very big changes that take place. But we have become a society that finds it tremendously easy not to pay attention. Because after all, there's so much filling our minds. There's so many interesting things to look at all the time. Even as I'm speaking, I can be distracted by looking at what's on my phone. Here it is. I'm looking at it as I speak. It's extraordinarily easy for your mind to go somewhere else. Someone very wise said to me once, years ago, don't just do something, sit there. And I think we could all do with a lot less doing something and a lot more sitting there, because it's in the sitting there that you make the deep human connections. Facebook likes are not human connections. Retweeting something is not very human. Understanding a little bit about many things doesn't make you an expert on anything. But being deeply connected where you live, in the school at which your children go, to the people around you, to the institutions and organisations that shape your lives, whether those institutions are the massive ones of the university or the tiny ones of the allotment society in which you're in, is what prepares us to make real change. Because in this disruptive, scary decade, which we are all daunted about, and don't let anyone tell you it's going to be a breeze, because this decade is going to be a scary one. It may be a massively productive one. It may be, as our Prime Minister tells us, the decade in which Britain will become great again. Let's hope so. But it is also the decade of extraordinary change. And at times of change, what do you need to do? You need to pay close attention to what's happening, not in front of you, not what the newspapers tell you to look at, but sometimes what's happening at the edge of your eye, the corner of your eye, edge of your consciousness. What's happening at the margins? What's happening at the places where they don't want you to look? What's happening in the places which are perhaps a bit more uncomfortable, a bit more difficult to see? Those changes are what make us, as a village, as a town, as a region, as a country. They're also what makes us as human beings, because I think the next decade could be the decade for deep and powerful human connection, for making links which surprise us, for getting to know people who are different from us, for working across those boundaries that are so often so policed. If we do that, we grow as individuals, yes, for sure. And that is hugely important. But we also grow as a society that can make the really difficult decisions, that can be ready for the really major shocks. When the floods happened in South Yorkshire, people there didn't say it's because of climate change, not because they're stupid, but because they were taking their neighbours' cups of tea and putting people up in their room overnight. People facing disaster don't see the big picture, but what they do is express their humanity. And that, in all my experience, is the beginning of social change. Paying attention, being connected, recognising that every small change has consequences, and that those people who thought it didn't really matter, that in Grenfell Tower they now had 13 landlords, not one, made a very small mistake that has had massive consequences. Those people who said we can call a referendum because everyone we know votes one way have had massive consequences. Those people who failed to listen to the detail of the stories that people are saying, those people who are unable to stop doing something, just sit there, listen carefully. They're the people who make real social change.